In 1587, over 100 English settlers sailed into the unknown, hoping to build a new life in the New World. In 1590, when Governor John White returned to Roanoke, the colony was deserted. Only two mysterious words remained: Co and Croatoan. To understand this mystery, we must return to where it all began. England, 1584. England's dream of building its first colony in the New World was about to begin. Beyond the Atlantic lay an untouched land, a place that promised wealth, opportunity, and a future for England. But when John White returned, in 1590, he found no signs of hurricane damage. The buildings were carefully dismantled, not destroyed. A new settlement was born, full of hope. But hidden within these forests, a mystery was already waiting. By the late 1500s, one empire ruled the New World without challenge: Spain. Its treasure fleets carried unimaginable wealth across the Atlantic, making Spain the world's greatest colonial power. But across the sea, England was preparing a bold plan to challenge that dominance. That decision would lead to one of the greatest mysteries in American history: the lost colony of Roanoke. By the late 16th century, Spain had become the undisputed superpower of the New World. Under King Philip II, Spanish influence stretched across the Caribbean, Florida, and much of Central and South America. Spain's growing empire brought immense wealth. It brought powerful trade routes and unmatched influence across the Atlantic. Across the sea, England watched Spain's rise with growing concern. If England hoped to compete, it would need a foothold in the New World. The idea came from one man, Sir Walter Raleigh. He believed an English colony could break Spain's grip on the Atlantic. The colony would serve as a strategic base for English privateers to strike Spanish treasure ships and disrupt their trade routes.
At first, Queen Elizabeth I rejected the proposal, fearing Spain would retaliate. Eventually, she granted Raleigh a royal charter, but under strict conditions.
The colony had to be established within 7 years, and Raleigh himself was required to remain in England. In April 1584, England launched its first reconnaissance expedition to the New World. The voyage was led by Philip Amadas and Arthur Barlowe. Their route first carried them south to the Canary Islands, before crossing the Atlantic. After reaching the West Indies, the expedition remained there for 12 days, before sailing north. In July 1584, they finally reached the outer banks of present-day North Carolina. Their mission was not to establish a colony, but to search for the best place to build one. What they discovered would soon change England's ambitions in North America forever. What they discovered was Roanoke Island, a place that would soon change England's ambitions in North America forever. A small island nestled between the mainland and the Outer Banks, it offered both natural protection and easy access to the coast. To Arthur Barlowe, the land seemed unlike anything he had ever seen before. He described the soil as the most plentiful, sweet, fruitful, and wholesome he had ever encountered. To the English, Roanoke looked like the beginning of a new future in North America. While exploring Roanoke Island, the English also made contact with the Carolina Algonquians. One of the first to meet the English was Granganimeo of the Roanoke people. He was acting on behalf of his brother, Chief Wingina. Granganimeo believed the English could become powerful allies. He welcomed the English and traded with them, opening the door to a possible alliance. That peaceful exchange opened the door to a possible alliance between the English and the Roanoke people. When the expedition returned to England, 2 Algonquian men returned with them, Manteo of the Croatoan and Wanchese of the Roanoke. Their arrival in England attracted widespread curiosity and strengthened support for Raleigh's colonial plans.
They worked closely with scientist Thomas Harriot as he learned their language, while teaching them English.
Together, they shared the basics of each other's languages and exchanged knowledge. Manteo and Wanchese also gave the English valuable insights into Algonquian culture and social structure, knowledge that would help prepare the next expedition. On April 9, 1585, England was ready to try again. This was almost exactly 1 year after the first expedition departed. This time, 7 ships carried nearly 600 soldiers and sailors across the Atlantic. Among those on board were Manteo and Wanchese, returning across the Atlantic with the English expedition. Their destination was North America, where England would attempt to establish its first English colony. Everything England had learned during the 1584 expedition had led to this moment. The voyage had begun. But the greatest mystery in early American history was still waiting. Before the lost colony became history's greatest mystery, another English colony had already begun to fall apart. In 1585, England launched its boldest mission yet, to build its first military colony in North America.
7 ships, carrying nearly 600 soldiers and sailors, sailed into the unknown.
But the Atlantic had its own plans. A violent Atlantic storm battered the expedition, damaging ships before they ever reached America. Forced to stop in Puerto Rico, the fleet spent precious weeks repairing the damage. Governor Ralph Lane believed every lost day was pushing the colony closer to disaster. On June 26, 1585, the expedition finally reached Roanoke Island. But the colony's greatest setback came before a single home had been built.
All hands on deck! Secure the cargo! She is striking!
The damaged flagship destroyed much of the colony's precious food supply, shattering the original plan before it had even begun. With most of the supplies gone, the original plan had collapsed almost overnight. Grenville made a difficult decision. He would return to England for supplies, leaving only 100 men behind. Now isolated, the colonists had only one choice: build a settlement before winter arrived. They quickly raised a small earthen fort to protect themselves in an unfamiliar land. Around the fort, simple wooden homes became the colony's first shelter. Nearby, scientists and craftsmen worked to unlock the resources of the New World. The colonists had hoped to survive through farming, but reality proved far more difficult. To stay alive, the English increasingly depended on the Algonquian people for food. What began as cooperation slowly became dependence. For Governor Ralph Lane, dependence meant danger. Determined to keep order, Lane tightened his control over the colony. He even ordered a jail built to enforce discipline among his own men.
Come bend the law!
The fragile partnership soon faced an invisible enemy: disease. Smallpox and other European diseases spread through communities with no natural immunity. Many believed the newcomers possessed mysterious powers, but Chief Wingina refused to accept. To Wingina, the English were not gods. They were vulnerable strangers. Across the settlement, the English sensed the growing tension, but not its full danger. By the spring of 1586, the struggle for survival was becoming a struggle for war, and the first move had already begun. In the months ahead, fear would replace trust, and the fate of England's first military colony would change forever. By the spring of 1586, the greatest threat to the colony was no longer the wilderness. Beyond those trees, Chief Wingina had already made a decision that would change everything. Now calling himself Pemisapan, he believed the English had to be driven from the land. Instead of open battle, he chose a far more dangerous strategy: starvation. The blockade worked. With every passing day, food inside the colony became harder to find. To survive, small groups of English soldiers left the safety of the fort in search of food. It was exactly what Pemisapan had hoped for. Separated into small parties, the colonists had become easier to isolate and far more vulnerable. Before the plan could unfold, Ralph Lane received a warning. He learned that Pemisapan intended to trap isolated English foraging parties before they could return to the fort. Lane chose not to wait. Instead, he launched a preemptive expedition that would permanently reshape relations between the English and the Algonquian people. Before the planned blockade could be carried out, Lane moved first. The event ended, forever changing the balance of power in the region. With their leader gone, long-standing alliances between the English and the Algonquian people were changed forever. Then, just days later, unfamiliar sails appeared beyond the coast. For a moment, Lane feared the fleet belonged to Spain. Then came an unexpected relief. The ships carried English colors. The fleet belonged to Sir Francis Drake. returning after months of raiding Spanish shipping in the Caribbean. Drake offered Lane a chance to leave Roanoke behind and search for a better place to build the colony. But before those plans could begin, the Atlantic turned against them. A violent hurricane swept across the coast, tearing apart every plan they had made. With their ships damaged and their hopes fading, the search for a new settlement came to an end. With no supplies, no safe future, and no better settlement in sight, Lane made the hardest decision of all. In June 1586, the English abandoned Roanoke and sailed home with Sir Francis Drake. Ralph Lane would never return to North America. Less than a year later, Sir Walter Raleigh would send 118 men, women and children back to Roanoke, unknowingly beginning one of history's greatest unsolved mysteries. By the spring of 1587, England's dream of establishing a permanent colony in the New World was already beginning to fade. Even Sir Walter Raleigh remained supportive, but his enthusiasm had begun to fade. The colony had already cost nearly £30,000. Despite fading confidence, Sir Walter Raleigh still supported one final attempt to establish an English colony in America. In April 1587, 118 men, women and children began their journey across the Atlantic. The long Atlantic crossing tested every colonist as England slowly disappeared beyond the horizon. By July 1587, the expedition reached Roanoke Island, though it was never intended destination. Roanoke was only a planned stop before the expedition continued north to Chesapeake Bay. Captain Simon Fernandez refused to sail farther north, claiming that summer was rapidly coming to an end. With no other choice, the colonists disembarked and were left behind on Roanoke Island. The abandoned settlement revealed the first clue that something had gone terribly wrong before their arrival. The colonists immediately began rebuilding the abandoned fort and repairing the homes left by the earlier expedition.
By the end of July, the colonists had made remarkable progress, rebuilding their settlement.
John White still believed the colony could reach Chesapeake Bay before winter arrived. Once again, relations between the English settlers and the Algonquian people began to deteriorate. Soon after their arrival, George Howe was ambushed. He was killed by members of the Croatan tribe. In retaliation, White and his men marched toward what they believed was a Croatan village. But the English had attacked the wrong village. It belonged to the Croatoan people. The tragic mistake deepened mistrust, leaving relations between the English and Algonquian peoples more fragile than ever. Amid growing uncertainty, August brought a moment of hope with the birth of Virginia Dare. Her birth gave the struggling colony renewed hope for a lasting future in the New World. Threats, dwindling supplies, and the coming winter forced White to seek help from England.
In late August 1587, I sailed for England. I was on Roanoke for little more than a month.
Before White departed, the colonists agreed to divide into two separate groups. One group would remain on Roanoke, while another searched inland for a permanent settlement and reliable supplies. If they left Roanoke before White returned, their destination would be carved into nearby trees. On November 8, 1587, John White reached England. He reported to Sir Walter Raleigh. John White returned to England in 1587, believing he would soon return with supplies. But fate had other plans. John White believed another expedition would sail by spring, bringing supplies and hope back to Roanoke. The Spanish Armada, the world's most powerful fleet, was preparing to invade England.
Queen Elizabeth ordered every English ship to stay home and defend the kingdom.
England was preparing for its greatest naval conflict. The Spanish Armada threatened the homeland, forcing every English ship to remain for defense. The powerful Spanish Armada threatened England, changing John White's plans forever. Led by Sir Francis Drake, England's faster fleet defeated the mighty Spanish Armada. The defeat of the Spanish Armada saved England, but it delayed John White's return to Roanoke. After the Spanish Armada's defeat, Raleigh's focus shifted toward Ireland. John White was forced to find new investors for the journey. In early 1590, John White finally secured passage with privateers heading toward the West Indies. On August 18, 1590, after 3 years of uncertainty, John White finally reached Roanoke Island. He expected to find survivors, but the settlement was silent. The colony that once held more than 100 men, women, and children had disappeared. No voices, no movement, no sign of life. There were no bodies, no evidence of a violent attack, and no signs that the settlers had fled in panic. John White found 2 mysterious carvings left behind: Crow on a tree and Croatoan on the palisade. John White sailed toward Croatoan, but once again, a violent storm disrupted his final plan to uncover Roanoke's greatest mystery forever. Forced back to England, John White never discovered what became of the lost colony of Roanoke. After the loss of Roanoke, John White quietly disappeared from history. He is believed to have died around 1606, possibly in Ireland. But England learned from Roanoke's failure. In 1607, a new colony was founded at Jamestown, the first permanent English settlement in America. Roanoke disappeared, but its greatest mystery still remains. What really happened to the 117 lost colonists? For over 430 years, one question has remained unanswered. What really happened to the lost colony of Roanoke? John White found only 2 clues: CRO carved into a tree and Croatoan carved into the palisade. Since then, historians have investigated many theories, but none has ever been definitively proven. One popular theory suggests that a powerful hurricane destroyed the colony or forced the settlers to flee. Supporting this theory, a hurricane damaged Sir Francis Drake's fleet in 1586, and in 1588 a powerful storm was recorded in Havana. But when John White returned, in 1590, he found no signs of hurricane damage. The buildings were carefully dismantled, not destroyed. Another theory suggests famine and disease slowly weakened the colony until survival became impossible. Supporting this theory, a severe drought lasted 3 years, leaving even the Algonquian people with little food to trade. But John White found no graves. Disease or famine may have killed some colonists, but likely not the entire settlement.
Another theory suggests the Spanish discovered the colony and attacked the English settlers during the Anglo-Spanish War.
Supporting this theory, Spain learned about the colony, and Captain Vicente Gonzalez searched for the English in 1588. But John White found no signs of a Spanish attack. The village showed no evidence of battle or destruction. Another theory suggests the colonists left Roanoke and moved north to the Chesapeake Bay. Supporting this theory, Jamestown settlers heard many lost colonists had fought and died before their arrival. But no archaeological evidence exists, and the journey required open ocean navigation beyond the colonists' known sailing experience. Another theory suggests the colonists left Roanoke and traveled inland through the Albemarle Sound. Supporting this theory, John White's map hid a fort-like symbol, and English artifacts were later found in Bertie County.
But no graves, buildings, or human remains were found, and the artifacts may have reached there through trade.
Another theory suggests the colonists left Roanoke and relocated to Croatoan, present-day Hatteras Island. Supporting this theory, artifacts were found on Hatteras Island, where the Croatoan people and Manteo once lived. But no graves, buildings, or human remains were found, and the island's limited resources raised further questions. John White formed his own theory after discovering the carvings at the abandoned settlement. White believed the colonists had moved to Croatoan after finding the carved message in the abandoned village. But storms prevented White from reaching Croatoan, leaving his theory forever unconfirmed. After more than 430 years, no theory has definitively explained what happened to the lost colony.
Which theory do you believe? Tell us your thoughts in the comments.
Subscribe to the UnveilX Media for more true historical mysteries and documentaries.